Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday.
Welcome, welcome, everyone.
Welcome to our CKLA educator panel.
We have an amazing group of educators here today, so we are so excited for you all to join us and hear from them.
Yeah, absolutely, Karen. And I hope everybody's getting their green ready for St. Patrick's Day on Friday. But as we have you signing on, you know that we love to see where you're joining from. So make sure to put that in the chat. Candace, thank you for leading the way and welcome from Maryland.
And Iowa's joining right after. I love it. People are jumping in. New Hampshire, Kansas, Massachusetts. All right, it's coming fast and furious. We love it. As you're joining, we're going to start sharing a little bit of the housekeeping tasks. You will get a recording of this session that will be prepared and sent to you. We do have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as well. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that Q&A. We'd love to have some questions. We also love to have you share in the chat. So if you do have questions that come up in the chat, our participants, our panelists, we've always shared that we love for them to be able to share responses to those questions as well. So don't hesitate. We'll try to get to all those. Maybe we'll have some time at the end as well. Megan, am I missing anything about our housekeeping tasks?
Karen, I think you got it all. And I will say I'm just so grateful for everyone joining us today. One thing we always share as you are looking at making the shift to structured literacy or science of reading research and really transferring that theory into practice is, hey, hear from the people who've led the way, right? And so that's the opportunity we want to give you today. So kind of just thinking about today's topics. And if you know Karen and I, this is kind of what we have planned, but you never know where the road will take us. Right. And so we'll really kind of hone in on the adoption process and hear from our fearless leaders joining us, really looking at diving into change management and also de-implementation. What does it take to really implement CKLA, and what are those systems in place that we have to uncover as we're implementing CKLA to make sure that teachers are successful with their implementation, therefore reaching kiddos. But also, something that comes up in many conversations is diversity and representation within CKLA. So we'll hear how our district leaders have addressed that. Hopefully we have time for data, as Karen and I were at Plain Talk last week. And we got to hear from many of our partners on this call just about the outstanding data and transformation that they're seeing in their districts. We'll also just kind of make sure to or try and really get to that Q&A. Who knows, maybe the conversation will be so great that we'll answer your questions even as we're talking. So, Karen, now that we kind of have jumped in as we're going to introduce ourselves, we want to know from you, like, what's your role today? Are you coming to us as a teacher, a district leader, a coach, all of those things? And while you're putting that in the chat, Karen, I always turn it over to you first.
All right, well, I'm ready, Megan. And so as people are joining and sharing their roles, I love it. We've got teachers and coaches and principals, leaders. It's wonderful. And so Megan knows that I've served in a variety of roles. I was the first grade teacher, a middle school language arts teacher. I actually taught reading recovery too, which is interesting in this interesting time right now. But one of the best roles I've ever had is right now, because I get to do a lot of the things like get in classrooms and see students in action with CKLA, work with teachers, work with leaders like the ones on our call today. And so working with high quality instructional materials has been such a rejuvenating kind of experience. And that's where I got to meet Megan. And that's where we first kind of worked together in the field, working with teachers, sharing the wonderful resources.
And this is how the beautiful bond of friendship, especially when, it begins as kind of just really looking for change when it comes to literacy and empowering and equipping teachers to do that. This is how this beautiful friendship was formed. But for those of you who have never joined us, my name is Megan Mobear. I am actually from South Louisiana. I spend half my time in Knoxville, Tennessee, and half my time in Louisiana. I come to you today as a former CKLA teacher. Also met Karen with leading professional learning, but it was really through that implementation of CKLA that I actually didn't even know it. It just, it happened that I was putting science-based research into practice. But the main thing was I noticed my instruction was transforming as well as my student results. And I witnessed this happen across my district as well. And so obviously being here in this role with Karen to really kind of elevate educators who have also led this charge is just some of the most impactful work that we have the privilege of doing. So now that we've gotten to hear from you and your role, we'll actually turn it over to our panelists. We'll let you introduce yourselves. We'll start from left to right and we'll jump right in after that.
All right. Okay, cool. So my name is Brady Reinke. I'm the Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning in New Berlin, School District New Berlin in Wisconsin, suburban Milwaukee. We are actually in our first year of implementation after a number of years of trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I think it's going pretty smooth, so I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karla Stinehart, and I am the Director for Elementary Instruction for Roswell Schools in New Mexico. And I'm going to take a hint from Megan there. And I come to you today as a recovering balanced literacy educator and someone who is very passionate about shifting the work in our district to structured literacy and the science of reading. We are currently we have some schools that are in year 2 implementation, but district-wide implementation, we're in year 1.
Right.
Hi, I'm Alli Rice. I'm from Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools. I am all things elementary ELA for my district. So I do adoptions and support implementation. Like Karla, our district prior to me stepping in this role had been balanced literacy for about 27 years. I was a teacher in the district. I didn't know any different. And then kind of started my science of reading journey about 5 years ago. And I've been in my current district leadership role for, this is year 3. We are implementing CKLA as well, depending on the building, depending on the grade level. I've got 28 elementaries. We're anywhere from year 1 to year 3 in our implementation.
Hi, I'm Patricia Smith. I currently am coming from the curriculum department. I was the curriculum specialist there for 9 years. Adopted CKLA, got an opportunity to work with the state in the tiering of it and in our district. And then I had an opportunity to teach it during COVID. Currently, I am the Director of Federal Programs, where I now support the world of intervention. So that's been very nice for me to be able to bring that knowledge of the curriculum into our intervention world and kind of restructure that support through our CKLA.
I think, Megan, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I've never used Zoom before. You know what? Thank you all so much for taking the time to introduce yourselves. You know, as I look at this kind of dynamic group of leaders, of district leaders, I know that the kind of the demographics in your districts all look very different. And so I'm excited to dive in. Before we actually do that, I kind of just want to know, and instead of a poll, we'll actually put this in the chat. So what is your familiarity with CKLA as you're joining us today? Let's say 5 being, maybe I've worked on writing the curriculum, so I know the ins and outs. And there is someone on the call who's done that. And also maybe it's that you are brand new to CKLA and you're joining the call to learn more about it. Maybe you just know that it's CKLA stands for Core Knowledge Language Arts. Maybe you don't. That would be like a 1, right? So 5, I'm an expert. 1, this is new to me. And so we can just kind of gauge where you all are.
So as people are putting that in the chat, I have to say and I hope I don't mispronounce it, but I think Georgios from Cyprus probably is the person joining from the furthest away today. So welcome from Cyprus. I don't know that we've ever had someone on the call from Cyprus, or I didn't notice. So
I'm so grateful you pointed that out, Karen. I see the chat rolling in, and it's always exciting to see where everyone's from. But I also love kind of that everyone is coming from a wide range, having a wide range of knowledge about Amplify CKLA. So for those of you who are like that 0 to 1 place, CKLA is actually, it stands for Core Knowledge Language Arts. This is Amplify's pre-K through 5th grade comprehensive Tier 1 literacy curriculum that's truly grounded in the science of reading research. And what we mean by that when we say that is not only is the program, not only are the instructional practices really kind of those key characteristics of what we see in science-based instruction, but even the program structure itself. And so to kind of level set, we have to kind of revisit the simple view, and I'll just stay here today. We're not going to dive into the reading rope, but as we look at the simple view, obviously Goff and Tumner have given us this way to identify these two main components needed to develop a proficient reader. We know kids have to have word recognition ability to be able to lift words off the page, to become skilled decoders and encoders. These are really those foundational skills. But the other equally as important component is something that my dear friend Shirley unpacks so well, and that's language comprehension. When we think about language comprehension, it's really just having the ability to make meaning of words as they're being lifted off the page, because as readers, we bring background knowledge and vocabulary to text to be able to think critically about it and be able to take away more meaning. One without the other doesn't result in a skilled or proficient reader. And so this is why CKLA is even structured the way that it is. When it comes to where the focus areas are, we know that foundational skills are going to be explicitly taught in the skill strand. We'll see that in the knowledge strand, starting in K to 2, will really provide that exposure to rich worldly content. And as we do that, we'll see kids come together as skilled readers in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. But kind of the premise of the kindergarten through 2nd grade strand, and maybe this, I know for me, and I'm sure many of your teachers on the call today, as you begin to look at CKLA, it's very apparent that it's 2 strands in K to 2, right? I have a teacher's guide for foundational skills. I have a teacher's guide for this knowledge strand. What does that mean for me? Well, that's actually taking that simple view and putting an equal emphasis on both strands every day during Tier 1 instruction. And so we're going to take an explicit systematic approach to developing foundational skills. Starting in pre-K, we'll see that transition into knowledge in the other half of that literacy block every day, as kids get to just explore rich worldly content delivered through daily oral read alouds, really builds vocabulary around a wide range of topics. And also they just become sophisticated conversationalists as they learn how to transfer that knowledge into writing as well. And so Karen, I know that when it comes to 3-5, you have a lot of experience here. So I'll let you kind of share more about the 3-5 strand.
Well, and I don't know, I think the real emphasis to me, as we think about the 2 strands being separate in the lower grades and merging those and becoming an integrated strand, it really is, and Megan knows I'm all about the visuals. It's all about the text. So when you think about students, they are in that grade level text, navigating that text, having teachers support them with the scaffolding within that teacher's guide to really unpack the complex text. But the key is all of the actual skills when we talk about the standards, when we're working on morphology or grammar or spelling, that writing with text evidence, all of those things are a part of that content area, and kids really build that knowledge beautifully. And I think all of our participants have seen that happen across grades, which is a really neat thing to see, starting in early grades and moving that content and that wonderful rich vocabulary as well into the upper grades.
Yeah, and Karen, I just realized this is actually showing our comprehensive Caminos program on this slide as well. So got a little taste of those images. But we'll start here with our first kind of topic of conversation. We understand and we have just the privilege of working with so many phenomenal district leaders who are doing the work, maybe for the first time, or maybe it's for the third time, who knows, right? But regardless, preparing for a core literacy adoption, this process looks very different than maybe even if you are in your third go round. And so when we look at how we really kind of prepare for a literacy adoption, even thinking about some of the work that Karla from Roswell versus Miss Pat from St. Charles Parish, right? Miss Pat, I think on this call, you actually have kind of the longest standing implementation of CKLA. And this kind of dates back, obviously, to kind of some of those early, some previous years where the state of department in Louisiana was evaluating curricula. I kind of fell into that category as well. I'm curious. I'm going to actually turn it over to Karla to talk about her implementation, because Ms. Pat, as a 9-year veteran, right, knowing kind of what that prep looked like in your adoption versus maybe Karla or Brady or Alli's process, I'm curious how they've kind of played out. So I'll actually turn it over to Karla, and we'll hear from you first, Karla.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, because our adoption was not without some pretty interesting scenarios. We tried to go into the adoption with at least having a large percentage of our teachers already trained in letters. So we had been on the letters journey for maybe a year and a half before we started reviewing. And we put our committee together, but our committee was very split. We ended up with a lot of people at the table that were trained in the science of reading, and then a big group of people who hadn't made the shift yet. And so we had a very split committee decision, actually didn't pass the board recommendation. We did, I think in the adoption process, one of my favorite things that we did is we did publisher interviews with the science of reading specific questions. And I remember Megan telling us, I asked the problem, how would CKLA help us if we've got single digit proficiencies? What is it about CKLA that's going to help our district turn literacy rates around for our schools? And she says, wow, if you're in single digit proficiency, what that tells me is that you've got a problem with your core instruction. And I think that was absolutely correct, because we had differentiated our way away from core instruction and grade level rigor. So we really needed to be thoughtful about having a program that has the rigor, has the sequence, and is based in the science of reading. And so I think that from the get-go, that was something that was very front and center for us as far as like just starting the adoption process.
I am so glad you reminded me of those conversations, because I've had similar conversations with other people on this call. And Karla, I remember, your teachers actually went through letters training, the majority of that committee. It showed really in how they were reviewing core instruction as far as when they looked at Amplify CKLA, they were able to identify, okay, how is this research that I've just learned about in letters training, how is this transferring into practice? And so, Alli, what was kind of the prep work that you all did to prepare for your adoption?
Well, I was brand new to my role, and we were not actually up for an adoption in K3 for another several years. But, God bless ESSER funds. My boss, who was also brand new in her role, we both knew that our previous program, which was guided reading and balanced literacy, wasn't going to work. And her and I kind of got into cahoots about trying to figure out how are we going to get this resource replaced? How are we going to allocate some of these funds and go ahead and get this to the board and get it done? She took care of, manipulating that end of things while I got a teacher cadre up and running, and we started reviewing resources. We also started pushing letters training, like Karla said, before the implementation year. We didn't get it in before the exploration year, but my district had done some science of reading trainings. Our state actually has a 6-hour mandated. I saw someone from Kansas here, so they know the dyslexia training that I'm talking about. And so I just put everything in front of my teacher cadre. It's about 20 teachers. It was during COVID, remote learning. So all of my teachers were at their houses getting samples shipped to their homes, which was kind of funny. I have the room I'm in now was so full of boxes, you couldn't even walk through safely. We started reviewing everything virtually and kind of got it narrowed down through our own rubric, through vendor interviews, vendor presentations. I reached out to people that I found in Facebook groups. Kareem Weaver was one of them, actually, like 3 years ago. And he met me on Zoom and talked with me about what they were doing in Oakland. And he's the one who first pointed out to me that, when I'm reviewing a resource or having my teachers review a resource, it's got to be usable. That wasn't something that was originally on our evaluation tool. And I added an entire tab on our Google Sheet for just teacher usability. How much prep time is it going to take? Can a substitute pick it up? How do first-year teachers do with this resource? Because I am in a highly urban district. And if anyone else on the call here is in a highly urban district, you all know that highly urban also typically means high turnover and a lot of new teachers. We narrowed it down to 2 resources that we did a 9-week pilot on. So I had over 40 pilot classrooms and collected all the data. I know diversity is one of our topics. We also involved our diversity, equity, and inclusion department to do text bias reviews on our top 2 resources. And then we had a small selection committee kind of review the data at the end of the pilot. I mean, all in all, it was about a 2-year process to get things through board in December so that I could have a semester to get all of our curriculum documents up to date before a full launch in August. So it was a lot of work. I do think some of the training, the professional learning and stuff helped. Unlike Karla, I do have some teachers who have been more on the reluctant or resistant side. But for the most part, people recognize, they see their data. They know that what we were doing wasn't working, and there's not a lot of ground to argue that on. That it's definitely time to do something different. And so far in our first year of kindergarten, it's looking really great. We're really excited.
So Alli, I have to say that you and Karla sharing that same kind of data, I'm actually going to turn it over to Brady. You all had a really extensive process. That's something that we can't urge and I'm sure you all feel the same way. And Ms. Pat, I can't wait to get to you because I feel like your implementation of CKLA has somewhat been a process as well. Whenever we think about preparing for an adoption, this isn't something that happens overnight when you're looking to really support change in your district through providing teachers with a curriculum resource. And so just hearing about Karla and Alli and 2 years and letters training and how we kind of have reached out to folks to help us make those to set the framework for a different type of adoption process is something that's really important. But you all talk about reading proficiency. Karen, we know our friend Brady. We can think back to the conversations we had with Brady. Brady came to reviewing CKLA. Well, I'll let you tell your story because I know your reading proficiency levels are a little different.
Yeah, the school district New Berlin is a high achieving, affluent, relatively school district, suburban school district. So, we as we got into it, we knew like 3 years ago, hey, we were going to make some changes, and we started to learn, about the science of reading, and we dug into it really, really, deeply. And when I say we, I mean like a small core group of like leaders. And then as we moved into year 2, and really that was our kind of our year, we involved a small group of teachers, and like we really had to train them a lot. We didn't do letters, we didn't do any of that kind of stuff. We just kind of did our own thing. But we had to get our teachers, that group of teachers, to see it, and we had to believe it too, right? Like, and so that was really, really important. And so we had this group that we built into, we kind of went through that whole change management. I know we're not talking about that right now, process, but we did some really cool things. Our superintendent, one of his big things to me was you need to talk to other people that are doing it, and you need to talk to other suburban affluent school districts that are doing this. And so that was actually a really rewarding experience for me, because I was able to meet people from all over the country. And we still keep in touch, and it's kind of fun. We have our CKLA support group, that we meet with. And the thing that we were really conscious of in our selection process was actually a couple of things. One, we had a group of teachers that were, once they kind of understood what we needed to be doing, they really looked at like, okay, what thing can we adopt that teachers could still do what they've always done and kind of get away with it, so to speak. And they were really adamant about when we looked at a program, they're like, we can still do what we've always done with that one, so let's throw it away. And so that was actually pretty cool that our teachers were doing that. And then second, we knew we needed to have a level of training. And Ed Reports is a good thing. It's a good place to start. But in my opinion, it's not like that's based on the science of reading, right? Like they're not, the rubrics or whatever aren't saying, well, science of reading stuff, this is green on Ed Reports, and everybody's saying, oh, it's green on Ed Reports, it's got to be good, and we've seen that, since we've seen a lot of districts in our area actually reviewing things, and it's like, well, that's pretty science of reading light, actually. So we were bringing this group of teachers along, and then we were also slowly bringing everybody else along, so they could see, kind of, we're really exposing that knowledge building piece. I mean, everybody with the science of reading thinks phonics, foundational skills, all that kind of stuff, and that's really important. But like that other side of the rope, or the equation, or whatever you want to call it, is uber important, and that's what we were really interested in. Because again, we were a pretty high achieving district, so we were really concerned not only about our most struggling students, but our highest achieving students, because we have a fair amount of them as well. So we got really involved with that. And then actually we had, I think Karen and Megan came and did a kind of just science of reading presentation. We had Natalie Wexler do something. And then after that, everybody was like, okay, now we see this is what we need to do. And we did it. And we had a little pushback from our board, but not, nothing we couldn't get through, because we had done all the research and everything like that. So we had answers to all the questions, which was good. So
I love that. A tight adoption process, making sure that as you go along the way, really kind of gather documentation, show the work that's been put into that really helps with that that board presentation. But Miss Pat, as you listen to this, right, we're hearing things like letters training, and we all know that 9 years ago, what did this look like for you all?
Yeah, I didn't have the pleasure of those 3 stories. That would have been nice. I am in a district where reading recovery was still going on. So it was a struggle, because what CKLA offers, we didn't have a systematic phonics program in place. Our students, even though we had reading recovery as a very strong intervention approach, and we still had guided reading going on, our students were not getting to 3rd grade fluent. So we knew we needed to back up. Our data was showing us that we're not doing something in the lower grades. So we really started, CKLA has a foundational research, the white page document. So that actually ended up being our letters training, in the sense that our team started digging into that document and the research that linked teaching and reading together. And that is where we really started looking at the design principles. So that kind of helped us start reframing our thinking. But honestly, it was a struggle because we still had something going on alongside of us. So those interventionists who were doing what they had done for 15 years, because we were one of the only reading recovery districts in the States. There was no other district really doing reading recovery as we were doing it. So we are really just at this point. Once I moved into this position, I was really able to win them over and make that transition. But for us, we had to start teaching through the curriculum. Teachers started to see what they didn't know, and they started really reaching out and wanting to know more. But as I told you on the phone, the curriculum was so nicely designed that the information in those appendix in the first edition was where we would always go back to when there was a lack of knowledge. And we were all okay saying we just don't know, because that's not how we've been taught. Our reading recovery teachers are very powerful. When they pushed in, teachers were able to grab onto some of those strategies. I was one of those teachers that I was, wow, look what she's doing, and was able to pull in my small groups. But once CKLA came in, teachers felt a little bit more empowered, but we also found out what we didn't know as reading teachers in K-1 too.
I love that you shared those appendixes. I can remember as a first year CKLA teacher, knowing nothing about the science of reading research, not really understanding why I had two teachers' manuals. And so, Miss Pat, I can definitely relate to going back in the appendix and seeing the simple view and being like, oh, this is new. This is new to me, and kind of better understanding that. So really taking that approach, which we don't really see very often, I will say today, when as reviewers are looking at CKLA, as far as, for the most part, reviewers, because of the accessibility of the research, they're really coming with some depth of knowledge or some familiarity with the research itself because it's so accessible. But years ago, Miss Pat, that was a big lift. And it doesn't mean that making that shift is not a lift today, though. You might have the sweat equity built into that shift for sure, and just those experiences, but it kind of just segues right into this. And Karen, you and I always talk about change management. What does that really look like? So you make a decision, right? What's the work that has to be done after that decision? We kind of got to hear a little about some of the work that, like Miss Pat said, like, look, we were kind of shedding some of those practices that we were bringing in to the curriculum, and it was taking away from the integrity of the implementation, right? Because I would imagine just time taking over. But, Karen, we speak with teachers all the time who are like, hey, well, where's this part of the reading block? How does CKLA do this practice? And it really goes back to those beliefs that we are bringing from our past literacy history or teaching background, when it comes to how we teach reading, that we're really starting to look for these components in CKLA. So as change leaders, it's important and every one of you on this call has really done this work. How have you kind of helped manage that process, cultivating an environment of positivity and excitement versus one of like, oh my goodness, the change management process is so hard. The work's just begun. Where do we go from here? And this is an ongoing process. And so, Karla, I'm going to turn it back over to you to hear what you have to say about this, kind of the things that you've done.
Oh, absolutely. I think from the beginning, it was important to us to begin with the believers, to begin with those teachers who were just so excited to have something that was aligned to structured literacy and to get started on the work in their classrooms, that really shaped the narrative of and the positive vibes moving forward as we moved into full district implementation, because everyone else is kind of, they're going to peek over the fence a little bit to see how it's going to go. But I think being able to do that, but then also I guess a little bit on the flip side is being able to identify and manage all of the expectations that have been communicated out to teachers over a period of years, even like maybe before I even started, in this district, going into a classroom and I see a beautiful CKLA lesson and everything's great. And then I look at the bulletin board and I see, and here's our 20 memorization sight words for this quarter. And so just realizing and being mindful of what are those practices that maybe we don't remember are still in use every day. And explicitly giving people permission to move away from those practices.
Karla, that brings, I love hearing about that because we think about what we refer to as de-implementation, right? And in one of our most downloaded podcast episodes, and I think probably a lot of people on the call, that's one of the things that you are here for. I mean, you listened to our fearless leader, Susan Lambert, on the Science of Reading, the podcast, and Doug Reeves talked about de-implementation and how important that is. Not piling more and more and more on. And I think, Alli, when I think about such a large district that and I think I heard you say when we were in Plain Talk, 28 elementary schools. That's a lot of schools to keep a handle on. So when you think about de-implementation and you talked about balanced literacy and talked about guided reading, what are some of the things that districts might have to look for and work, and how are they working with their teachers to help them with that process of de-implementation, help them move, like you said, away from Karla, some of those practices that they have tried, that they hold, because it's very emotional at times. And so maybe, Alli, you can speak to that with such a large district working for you.
Yeah, there are a lot of emotions involved. That's for sure. Nobody likes to feel as if they have been preventing children from learning to read for the last 20 or more years. And a lot of times we will experience teachers and principals who are, they can accept that the data didn't look good, that they need to do something different, but then they don't really equate what they were doing before with being the thing that needs to change, right? So I always am an advocate for the more knowledge people can have about not only what are science of reading-based practices that have the research behind them that work, but also kind of debunking the balanced literacy guided reading things as well. Like, for example, I got an email the other day from a 4th grade teacher, saying, well, my kids just don't have that much time to independently read. And I'll be transparent. Like, we are not a high achieving district by any means yet. When I pulled her data in FastBridge, the honest truth was most of her students are not independently reading at a grade level time, and that goes back to that we wanted to have monitored, we're missing monitored independent reading. We're missing that. But when I really get to the root of it and I really have these conversations, were you really monitoring them? Because when I had kids in my classroom and it was that 30 minutes a day of monitored independent reading, was I really able to get to everyone? And by April or May, was I keeping up with that? Or was I packing up my classroom, responding to emails, right? Like, while my kids were sitting there was I using that as an extra break for myself? Like, just being real. So I think having the patience, though, to have those conversations and understand, like, people aren't going to change because someone at a central office tells them to change, right? Like, that's not going to happen. All I can do, and I realize too, like, I'm not, a 40-year veteran educator by any means. So there's people who I've literally been told, like, I've been teaching longer than you've been alive. I don't need to hear anything that you have to say. And kind of what Karla was saying, like, you just go where you're welcome, and you go where people are ready to receive it, and they're ready to get the messaging, and they're ready to make the changes, and they're ready to be vulnerable and kind of let you in. And I have found that there's more places like that in my district than not, the more and more I go around. And then eventually, slowly but surely, those holdouts, right? They start seeing the data coming out of their friend's building that's down the street, right? Like, or they've got somebody in their building, or a principal comes back with news from another building, and it starts to say, well, you know, I think as much as educators have really, really, really giant hearts and love like molding the minds of children, and that's why we all kind of got into it, we're also really competitive, right? Like, I have not met a single teacher that's not just a little bit competitive of you know, wanting to win and wanting to succeed. And especially in our district, where we had gone plateau or stagnant with, you know, less than impressive data for a really, really long time, to start hearing the little rumors and the little buzz coming out of some of our buildings that have been high implementation buildings, that have really bought in, that have had building leadership, that have really advocated for the shift and really supported their teachers. And now they're getting these results. Finally, those other areas, those other packets of, I don't want to do that, or I miss my guided reading, or I miss my monitored independent reading, or I miss my writer's workshop. They're finally starting to say, oh, well, maybe this could work, right? Like, these buildings who haven't historically had this awesome data are now turning out more and more kids on benchmark than we've ever seen before.
And I love it that you bring it back to the data. And I think all of us, the word data has come up because it really, that it's, you can't argue with the data, you know.
You can't.
And
No,
so
you really can't.
And so, especially like when you talked about the teacher who said the independent reading, but then you look at the data that shared where her students are really performing. And so what is the best use of our time? And I think when you look at CKLA, when you look at that implementation, you definitely want to keep that emphasis on the data, because as you said earlier, the emotions really come into play for that. And I know Megan sees that all the time in her pilot work.
All the time. In fact, one thing that I found really interesting that you just recently shared at Plain Talk, Alli, was that your year 1 data to your year 2 data, and the difference has just been phenomenal. And as I look at our panel of educators, I'm sure Karla and Brady, well, Brady, I kind of know a little bit about your data story, and Miss Pat, I'm sure you have great data to share, but do you mind actually, Alli, just kind of expanding on what you shared with us about that data and how you've really taken that step by step with the goals of this implementation, right? This isn't going to happen overnight. The systems we have in place aren't going to just disappear and then we rebuild these systems overnight, right? We didn't land here. How do we move away from that? So I'd love for you to share your data story about kindergarten.
Yeah, so this year I've drilled down into kindergarten. I've made kindergarten a top priority. I was a kindergarten teacher in my district, along with other grades, but my first batch of kinders are now getting ready to graduate high school. So kindergarten is super important. And I remember being a kindergarten teacher in my district and constantly feeling like every professional learning didn't really apply to me, right? Like, it didn't really make sense for kindergarten. So for our implementation year, I have made it a priority to visit every kindergarten classroom, all 91 of them, in my district. I attend all kindergarten professional learning personally, whereas all my other grade levels get a video of me, and I go and I tell them how much they are valued and how much everything relies on kindergarten, right? Like, there's that time old, everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. Well, no, that's not completely true, but those foundational skills, yeah, you got to have your letter sounds and you've got to have your word segmenting there, right? So we use FastBridge as our district's universal screener, and there's 4 subtests, but I really, really wanted to focus on letter sounds and word segmenting, because If you don't have those two things coming out of kindergarten, then you're gonna have a really hard time in first grade, right? Like we can make up high frequency words, right? If we don't have all of our high frequency words, or if we don't have all of our letter names just perfect, but we've got to have letter sounds and we've got to have word seg. So those are the two subtests that I've really, really focused on. And at the end of last year, we unfortunately had 0 buildings that could say they benchmarked 50% or more of their students on letter sounds. And 50% is not, you know, we say that 80% is indicative of a healthy core instruction, but we know that 95% of all students, according to the National Health Institute, are capable of doing this. So no buildings that could say 50% or more of our kinders are on track. This year for winter, I've got 14. I've got half my buildings that can claim we've got 50% or more of our kids on track. And that's the first time in a decade, like that our district has been able to claim that. We've got a handful of those buildings that are above 65%. We've got one that's at 78, so hitting close to that 80% on benchmark, and that's just in our first year. Word segmenting is the same thing. We had a supplemental core program in place for word segmenting last year with CKLA coming in. Oh, there's all my little celebrations.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, I'm sitting here thinking about the celebrating that occurs from sharing of data, right? Obviously, as we navigate through that management process, it is vital that as leaders, we are celebrating every small win. And even if that's student engagement within a lesson, student excitement about a topic they're learning about, maybe even building a model of a plant here that we see from you. But Brady and Alli, I'm so grateful you shared just the growth, like the process that it takes to not only strengthen implementation, but to see that growth in data. Brady, something that I absolutely, Karen and I felt so honored to not only hear about your data, but also to see the way that you have cultivated a climate that just supports and celebrates students in this change management process. And the reason it's so important is oftentimes we witness teachers kind of get lost in kind of refining themselves as reading teachers, right? And so it's easy to take the focus off of students because of the discomfort we experience. But one thing that I have seen so often, so many strong leaders do lately is just celebrating the student achievement through data, but also through this. So Brady, I'm going to let you actually kind of share about how you have this weekly check-in with coaches and also your data as well.
Yeah, I agree. You know, through this whole process, we've, you know, kind of had this mentality of, you know, schools are open so kids can learn, not necessarily so we adults have jobs. And that's been a really important thing to us, is always focusing on our kids, because it's hard. And I'm not saying, I mean, our teachers are doing an unbelievable job. It's hard. They're making a huge shift, and we're asking them to do that. One of the things that we've done in our implementation is really try to think through, okay, what are all the barriers that our teachers are going to come up with, whether it be like grading or assessments or whatever. And then our coaches meet with every team in the district, in every school, every other week, and really just unpack, like, this is what's coming up. This is what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to assess. Here's the assessments. Here's how we're going to grade these assessments. So everybody's just, you know, on the same page moving forward. So that's been really super cool. And then what's neat for me is I try to get out to buildings as much as I can. But those coaches then send me an update every Friday. Every Friday morning, I get my CKLA update, where these are the things that happened this week. These are the really, really good things. These are the pictures, you know, that kind of stuff, which is super cool. These are like the things that, hey, we should probably talk to Amplify about, which, by the way, Amplify has been wonderful with that. When we say, hey, you know, have you ever thought about doing this or that? We actually had a team or a meeting with like a project management team or whatever a while back, kind of just giving some ideas, which was super cool. And then just some, hey, here's some things that are on the horizon that we need to really get out in front of, you know. So for instance, parent teacher conferences, like when those were coming the first time, because everybody's like, I don't really know how to do a, you know, talk to parents without giving them a reading level or whatever. So that was really, really, really super important for us. And then, you know, the final thing that, like when we talk about celebrations, and I'm sorry, my phone is ringing right now. So the other thing about celebrations is we told our staff at the beginning of the year, you know, these kids are gonna learn how to read, and we know that. And 20 or 30 years from now, when we look back, they look back on their school experience, they're not going to remember how they learned to read. They're just going to know that they learned to read. But they're going to remember those small moments that were really, really impactful and really, really special. So our job as elementary school teachers is to make memories too. And so we've really pushed like making memories. And we've seen that throughout all of our grade levels in all of our schools, like just teachers like going above and beyond. You know, I was in the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I was in like, they were doing the Kings and Queens in kindergarten, and one of our teachers was like dressed up. She had her daughter's like prom dress on, and it was crazy. And, you know, one of our principals dressed up like Paul Bunyan, and he had this little stuffed dog that he put a blue shirt on, and it was Babe the Blue Ox. So, you know, some of those kinds of things have been really, really cool to celebrate too, right? And so it's not only building kids reading, but it's also really making those memories for kids, and those are nice celebrations.
Well, you know, Brady, you mentioned something, and celebrating the memorable teacher, right? The teacher that kids never forget about. Like Alli, whenever you were talking about competitive teachers, I was like, I literally was thinking the exact same thing, but we all also want to be that educator who has this profound impact on students. You know, but obviously with implementing CKLA, there are barriers. There are system level changes that have to be made when it comes to schedules, grading, report cards. But one thing that I also think needs to be celebrated is some of the work that districts have done to really kind of provide you know, diverse representation through CKLA, exposing students to rich worldly content, and making sure that all students are experiencing their own communities and cultures in the curriculum. But as we know, state to state, district to district, stakeholders' needs all differ when it comes to this topic. And one thing that we kind of will get asked is like, is in some places it's CKLA is too diverse, some places it's not diverse enough. And it's a topic that we have seen so many districts handle so well, and that alone needs to be celebrated. From, you know, looking at what like diving into the content and all of those things. And we had the pleasure of speaking with Ms. Pat about this exact same kind of topic recently. And when she shared her story about the work that they've done, I literally got chills because I was so excited to hear how this isn't just a decision that's made overnight to really utilize the program in the way that best fits the needs of student populations and areas and all of those things. But Ms. Pat, will you please speak to kind of what you shared with Karen and I, even about your pride rolling into this conversation in the district at the State Department, and kind of how you've approached this?
Yes. So at the district level, we again had started having conversations about diversity and inclusion within the curriculum. We had talked about it from a variety of perspectives, but when they brought it to the curriculum department, the question was, where is it? How is it? What are we doing about it? So the first plus for me was that we had already adopted the knowledge strand. We didn't adopt it the first year. We did CKLA skills and brought it in the second, started to learn. And as I said, we weren't ready for all that it had brought to us. So it really creates these opportunities for episodic learning for our students, because this was rich text, relevant text. and topics that in some regards we would not necessarily think to bring in, myths and kings and queens, and possibly, just all those topics that we weren't ready. Ancient civilizations, parents sometimes were like, wait a minute, I don't want you to teach all these different backgrounds. Some of the units that deal with different cultures and religion customs, we had to that was a challenge as well. But when we got to a conversation at the district level about the diversity piece, we were able to bring all of this in. So I think my proudness was able to be at the table with the executive staff and our school board to say, wait, we've adopted a curriculum in which we have already had the opportunity to present some things to our students. So in grade 2, we have, and I'm sure you're already aware, immigrants and fighting for a cause. And so those two allowed a variety of topics, because in one of them, they talk about just women in general. And then fighting for a cause is a variety of cultures and historical moments. And for us as a district, because those are two units that are in the back of knowledge, it was at the end of the school year. But we thought, because the district was now challenging us to make sure that that was within our curriculum, and we were really giving students that opportunity, as a district and a team, we decided to sit down and we looked at those units. We have always been able to call our reps at Amplify and get support and share with, hey, we want to move fighting for a cause and immigration up, because we wanted to put them in March and April so that we had enough time for the teachers to talk about it in a way that was meaningful for students. And the time, because those two units go together, it also gave us time to build out. So we were able to bring some additional text in. We were also challenged with bringing in those social studies standards. And so we were able to align a lot of second grade standards to the units that were in grade 2 and also in kindergarten. So when you look at those standards, some of those, again, allow you to bring in some diversity and inclusion within the context of your teaching. So those units were nicely provided, and all we then had to do is really look at, what do we want to do? How much time do we want to provide? And then how do we make those adjustments? And it gave the teachers, as I said, the heavy lifting was done. What we needed to do was be intentional and use it in the way that would be most meaningful for us. And so from there, our students were really enjoying it. We found ways to connect. Their writing opportunities increased again, because now they were given a world, and all of these units are very rich. So we've just been very happy about being able to have the opportunity to pull in that and not have to wonder where and how to get that information.
That's such an important point, especially as we think about equity, with making sure every kid in every building is exposed to those rich topics, the content, the complex text, right? Making sure that kids have access across different classrooms. And so it obviously was a very intentional decision with how you supported teachers. Sometimes it's hard for teachers to actually think about, like, to make those decisions and know where to go with them. So when you have the support from the district level, doing that work, partnering with Amplify to ensure that your needs are really met, that's just the most crucial work that you could do. So we commend you for that. Alli, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, that was a huge piece for us. My district's 9% white. So we've got 65 languages spoken, predominantly Spanish, but right up under Spanish is Swahili and Karen. So we're definitely just a large, diverse population. And we've had the same thing, couple phone calls here and there. Why is this religion being taught? But the diversity and social justice guide that Amplify provides has helped me a lot be able to navigate some conversations, has helped my teachers. And then they've also been really responsive. And, we just had a conversation in our district of, well, we would rather put information and topics in front of our students for them to process and for them to come to their own conclusions than to not give them any information about the world at all, right? You've got to make a choice there. And I definitely know that we've made the right choice. I remember during our pilot, we had a second grade girl who, during the ancient Asian civilizations unit, she had not talked all year long. The teacher thought she was in her silent phase for being an English language learner. And then they got to a lesson on Diwali. And this little girl stood up and talked about, just went on and on and on and on and on, because her family celebrates Diwali. And she had a wealth of information. The teacher got a hold of her parents with one of our translators. The parents brought in like all of this realia to the classroom. They had their own Diwali party, right? Like, so we've just had like bringing those things in. If someone's in our district, right, CKLA has a representation of that culture somewhere in the K-5 span. And so it's been really cool to see our kids feel seen and to feel heard and to be able to represent themselves and speak about their own culture and their own language through these lessons. It's been really, really, really cool and just heartwarming almost to see that happening. But I will always say, though, that the number one, right, you can't talk equity without bringing literacy to the table, right? Like, you've got the number one thing you can do, more so than, the mirrors and the windows and the sliding glass doors, is making sure that your kids can actually read. And that's why I'm just so appreciative that we've got a program in place now that's doing just that, is building the foundational skills so that we can, got our statistics here. Our 55% Hispanic, 24% African American district can be literate, functional members of society, and it's just, I'm very appreciative, I guess, for everything that CKLA has done for our district on both strands, foundational skills and the knowledge side. So,
Alli, and Megan's going to share. Alli, thank you for sharing that story. That we hear those stories all the time. And so I'm glad that some of our participants today got to hear one example, but those come up all the time. And it's so wonderful. And honestly, it makes you sad when you hear that a child who hasn't spoken all year, it took that to bring that out, but it did. And so it did bring that out. And so it's wonderful. Megan, I know you want to share about some other upcoming opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. We could continue this conversation all day, and I'll give our favorite stories about CKLA and the jumping off point that those rich knowledge domains provide for students to understand the connections of communities and civilizations and religion, and how civilizations were built from those things over time, right? And that's the key about developing background knowledge and vocabulary, is we're giving kids access to that. But as I think about kind of us wrapping this up, we're a little over time. These conversations will continue about other components in Amplify's early literacy suite. I love just the connections we kind of made when it comes to equity, but really we'll continue those conversations on these webinars. Be sure to save your spot using this website here. And I just want to say thank you to those of you who put questions in the chat, put questions in the Q&A. We've formed some connections here with these strong leaders, and hopefully you have taken away something to bring back to your district, to your teachers, to your leaders. maybe it's just simply that today gave you the courage to lead this charge or continue to lead this charge even when it's tough. And so we'll stay on for one more minute and kind of go through this Q&A. I want to make sure everything's answered. I know that everyone, I also want to say thank you to those of you who have decided to spend your afternoon with us, though. We hope to see you again soon. And until next time, Shirley and Laverne will hopefully be in touch with you in the future. So thank you all so much. I know, Brady, we had a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen, what were you going to say?
Yes, thanks for joining us today. We are grateful for all of our panelists and our participants.
Yes, thank you. Brady, thank you for connecting to answer that parent conversation. How do we really guide these conversations with parents? Those are all critical talking points that I think leaders and teachers are also just kind of looking for. How do we inform parents about something that we're learning about, right? And how do we get them to trust us in that? So thank you for taking that on, and thank you all for being here.
And Alli, thanks for putting the info in the chat about the reviewing tools.